Well, the Wolves are going to get swept out of the conference finals. What does that say about how Denver lost in the second round in Minnesota? Plus, we'll talk about internal improvements for the Nuggets. Where can they get improvement from internally, and where can't they? We'll talk about that next on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making this your first listen and being an everydayer, hanging out with us Monday through Friday, even on Memorial Day. Glad to have you with us. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network. I'm joined by Adam Mares of DNVR. This is World's Finest with you on a Monday. Glad to have you guys with us. And thanks for taking time out of your holiday to hang out with us here. On today's show, we will talk about would the Nuggets have beaten the Mavericks? What is the series versus the Mavericks and Wolves? What does that say about how Denver lost in the second round? Then we're going to talk about internal improvement. Who can get better? What are the internal improvements, not just with the bench, but with the starters as well? Who can improve year over year to make the Nuggets better going into 24-25? And then we'll talk about maybe where can't they and what does that mean for their needs in terms of looking externally into free agency and the draft. Glad to have you guys with us. Okay, let's start here. Adam, the Minnesota Timberwolves are down 3-0 to the Dallas Mavericks. Mavericks have closed every game with ferocity. I am going back and forth with Seth Part now, who's like, no, it's the offense. And I'm like, no, it's the defense. But from a Nuggets perspective, what's your big takeaway from the Western Conference Finals?
That the Wolves are a lot more beatable than they appeared in the last round. And we kind of know this from how that last series played out. There was one close game. There was 3 blowouts, or at least, if not blowouts, comfortable wins on each side. And I think that was indicative. And I think it's funny that I haven't been online, to see this argument, but I understand it because to me, offense and defense are usually only lightly separated. And in this series, I think they're not separated at all. Same with the Denver series. Each side impacts the others significantly. And the Mavs being able to handle that on-ball pressure, handle some of the stuff, the difficulties that Minnesota presents defensively, them not being bothered by that has sort of taken the nails off of that Timberwolves defense. And so for me, that's what stands out is when you handle that pressure, when you break it, then they become more or less, I mean, it's still a very good defense. Don't get me wrong. They protect the rim really well. They do all those other things. But it takes away the bite of what made them so special in that last round. And watching how easily Luka and Kyrie have handled it, to be honest, has been frustrating. But it also kind of shows you like, okay, that Wolves team, for as great as they were defensively when they looked on, they're not that great once you get past that first line of defense.
So Aaron Gordon struggled in the last 2 games of the Wolves series for sure. But also, like, there was a lot of commentary from Nuggets fans that were asking me, like, hey, why aren't they having Aaron handle the ball more? Why aren't they having him bring it up more? And that was a pretty consistent talking point. And the Nuggets did have a lot of success in those. And I thought about that last night because of one of the first things that I singled out in this Mavs-Wolves matchup was, oh no, Luka's going to go absolutely nuts here. And the reason is because the Wolves are built to handle guards like Jamal Murray. Like, they want to face quick guards trying to get to the edge. They want to face guys that they can pressure and body and be bigger than so they can control space. They can beat you to the spot because they're quick enough and long enough. And mostly the length is the big thing. And the Nuggets have kind of talked about that when we've asked about what makes Minnesota so good. So like they're able to contain that space that way. But when you have strength, that's where the Wolves falter. And we've seen that consistently in this series with Luka, where he gets that bump on Jaden McDaniels, who absolutely devoured Jamal Murray. And like, there's nothing Jaden can do. Like, Luka is so comfortable because of his strength advantage. And that to me is like a big component of this. It's one of the reasons though, why I do think that the Nuggets would have matched up better. As much as, there's like, I'm not saying it would have been a sweep. I'm not saying it would have been 5. It would have been a tough series. The Mavericks are playing awesome. Luka's been incredible. Kyrie's been amazing. But the Nuggets have a big defender in Aaron Gordon, to a big, strong power forward to throw at Luka as a primary defender. Watson, I think, would have played in that series. The Nuggets are built with more size. They don't have as much frontline top end speed defensively, but they have a lot of strength up in their perimeter defense. And that I think would have done a better job, as well as KCP being able to be like, he's just going to take Kyrie and work over the screens, because like that's a large part of this too, is because Jaden McDaniels is guarding Luka. Now you have Mike Conley or Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's done a good job, but hasn't played enough and not really in the Kyrie minutes either. And now Luka's getting loose too. Like, this is, to me, is like very much a matchup based thing. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying the Nuggets would have dominated, but I do still continue to feel confident that Denver would have been in a better spot versus Dallas, in part because on the other side of the ball, with how the Mavericks have a very simple strategy. We're going to absolutely jam the paint, and we're going to dare you to shoot stilted, non-rhythm threes.
Yeah.
But Jokic kind of changes all that with his ability to navigate the middle part of the floor. And so I think that Gafford and Lively are much better built versus pick and roll defense than post-ups or the kind of stuff that the Nuggets could run, especially with inverted pick and rolls with Nikola. So I just wind up feeling very confident that I'm like, no, I think Denver gets past the Mavericks if they've beaten the Wolves, which makes the Game 7 letdown that much more excruciating, I think.
I'll be honest, after the Game 7 game, I'm not sure they would have beaten them. Like, having to go as hard as they did and as tired as they looked in that second half, I'm not optimistic that they would have. If you just get over that game, you fully reset for the next series. I don't know. Denver had some flaws that reared itself in that second round that made you think maybe they weren't going away just with time. But nonetheless, if you just ask me about what was Denver's upside, you're right. I mean, Denver's core lineup, their starting lineup, is a two-way lineup. It has defense and it has offense. Minnesota has a little bit of one or the other. They're great. They're a great team, but they're a great defense with their core guys. And if they have to go offense, they'll take Rudy off, as they have done in both games late, or Cat off late in games and say, okay, we're going to go more to defense or we're going to go more to offense. They have to make that compromise. When you say Nickeil hasn't been playing as much as making the same impact that he was in the last series, part of that is they, against this very good Dallas defense, they have to pick. They have to pick a lane. Like, okay, we need more offense on the court. Yeah. We need to space it a little bit more. And so that's why the texture of this series is a little bit different for them. But the frustration is they didn't have to make that choice against Denver because their on-ball pressure was so overwhelming and so impactful that they didn't have to choose offense or defense. They said, you know what, we're just going to beat it this way and we're going to go to it. And I think that's the thing that's frustrating, because you're watching, you said they're designed, they want quick guards. Well, Kyrie's having a phenomenal series against them, and Kyrie's a great player. But if you would have asked us, 6 months ago, Kyrie playoff Jamal Murray, you would have said, like, it's not that different. They're the same guys. They score in different ways, but they impact it. You watch this series and you go, this year, not at all the same. Kyrie in a completely different class, and he's having a great series and doing what last night when he made the shot in the corner, I thought, man, that's such a Jamal shot.
Oh, that's a great point. Stefan Stojic says, why don't the Wolves stomp Kyrie like they did Jamal? Part of where I get to on this is because Kyrie is the secondary initiator. He's the secondary playmaker. So the Wolves are throwing, like, I think it's a mistake that the Wolves have gone to Jaden McDaniels on Luka, and Jaden's numbers on him are actually better than the regular season. Like, it's like he hasn't been individually cooked, right? But what you're doing there is you're basically saying we're trying so hard to shut down Luka, who has an advantage over Jaden anyway in terms of the strength, that we're willing to put a lesser matchup on Kyrie. And so now Kyrie's able to get loose, versus if they were to have put Jaden on Kyrie and been like, you got to shut the water off. We can live with Luka scoring 50. We can't get lobs and we can't get Kyrie going, because that to me is like where a lot of the series kind of exists. And so, like, I think, again, I feel like the Nuggets are better balanced to be able to be like, no, we'll throw our wings, our bigger forwards. We'll throw those guys on Luka. And then we'll, on the other end, we'll play our KCP on Kyrie. Now, Luka would have had a monster series, in part because the Nuggets play a lot of at level, like that's their best defense, and Luka shreds that. I actually think the tendencies, as much as I've torched them this year for Nikola playing more of a soft drop, would have been better versus Luka. If you notice, a lot of the coverages that are working better is when Luka's getting into soft drop. Like, that's actually better for him, because he's not going to like rise and fire with a guy coming behind him, because he doesn't have the speed and athleticism. But the Wolves are so freaked out by his strength advantage that they're throwing a lot of extra resources at him. And to me, that's opening up Kyrie. For the Nuggets, I look at that and I go, man, I think the secret there is like, you got to have, like, the Bruce Brown absence was so huge, but like, let's remove Bruce from the equation, because Bruce really wasn't able to be, like, there was no way to retain Bruce. I think the key lesson here is you do have to, this is what I think is so funny. The Nuggets won last year with size, strength, athleticism, this formula, and it worked, and they won a title, and they won 57 games this year and went to Game 7 second round. Like, they are not a flawed team. But one of the moves that the front office made was Conley was obsessed with multiple playmakers. He wanted as many guys that could dribble and create as possible. That's why you had Jamal and Facu and Austin Rivers when Jamal was out, like Facu and Austin Rivers and Monte. Like you had all of these guys because Tim's talked about that, about how much he wanted like multiple playmakers. And I don't necessarily think that the move away from that was bad because those guys were small, but it does kind of show that I do think for next year, it is important, I think, for the Nuggets to have in their pocket somewhere, whether it's internal or external development, they have to have a secondary playmaker better than KCP to be able to take advantage if teams are able to shut off the water versus Jamal, because I don't know if you can really, like I'll say this, I don't know if you can trust Jamal to be matchup proof right now.
I mean, I 100% agree. This is that watching that series does show you how much Bruce Brown, it was his ball handling. We said all year, like they missed his attitude and they missed his ball handling. People think it's his defense or this or that. It was the ball handling. It was the secondary guy that can just attack that you really needed. And I think that's absolutely the case when you watch this series. It stands out. So, lessons to be mined from this. The only other thing I'll say about Dallas that's really impressed me, there's a lot that's impressed me, but is their depth. They have a lot of different bodies that they can throw out that do similar but different things. And I think that's just something when you get into a series, having a Green, having a Hardy, having a Derek Jones, PJ Washington, they just have so many different guys that you can say, okay, what do we need? What is called for in this moment? And they can throw a variety of defenders out there. And it just shows that it helps to have 7, 8 deep.
Yeah, it definitely does, for sure. Up next, let's talk about internal improvement. Where on the Nuggets can they find internal improvement going into next season? We'll have lots of time to talk about the draft and free agency, but let's look at the Nuggets roster and ask the question of where can they improve internally next season? We'll talk about that up next here on Locked On Nuggets.
Oh, I don't have controls.
Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Welcome back to Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us here on Memorial Day. Cranking out shows for you, even on the holiday. That's how much we love you guys. And the chat's bumping. I just like you guys hanging out with us in the chat every day, even on Memorial Day. Dave, thank you guys. Really appreciate you guys doing that. All right, so Adam, let's talk about internal improvement here. And we kind of listed some of the weaknesses that the Wolves exposed and the playoffs exposed for the Denver Nuggets. If we talk about internal improvement next season, where do you want to start?
Well, I want to start actually by, we never got to talk together end of season. I gave my, my 2 cents. You kind of gave your 2 cents. But I really do think as you watch this series, I think there's 2 things that matter to the Nuggets this year in terms of why they didn't win it. One, Jamal, for whatever reason, wasn't up to that. I mean, he shot 40%, took the 8th most shots of anybody in the playoffs this year and shot 40%. I think that was like the 5th worst percentage of anybody to take 10 or more shots. So it was Jamal wasn't up for it. Was that because of injuries, in shape, what have you? As I made note on my solo show on Wednesday or Thursday or whatever day it was, the Nuggets brass, both Michael Malone and Calvin Booth, both citing conditioning for Jamal as a problem to me is big, because there was a lot of, 2 sides, like coach's perspective and front office perspective. And if you listen closely, subtle differences between the 2 visions, but that was one thing they were aligned on. So of all the things to be aligned about, Jamal wasn't in good enough shape this year is a very interesting one. So to me, that's number one. And then number 2, which kind of is connected to number 1 in many ways, though not all, was that I think Denver used up too much energy throughout the course of the regular season and just didn't have it. I mean, Aaron Gordon, even Jokic, especially Jamal and KCP. Those are the 4 guys that I would cite. And look, Michael Porter did not look as gassed as everyone else, but he didn't make any shots. So maybe that was a part of it. I don't know. But those 4 guys in particular, you could look at and say all of them looked like they had less in the tank than they did a year ago at that spot. So to me, those are the two storylines. So to set a baseline, in my opinion, that's number one, and number two, like, why did Denver not win a title this year? I think it's those two reasons. Before you get, I'm not trying to take away from the outside reasons. The Timberwolves were very good. That's another reason. But I'm saying things that pertain to Denver, those were the two reasons for me.
Well, and I think it's fair. I've struggled with this because I do think two things are possible. I think it's possible to be like, I don't feel like the Nuggets were as good as they were the year they won the championship. Not because they didn't win. I didn't feel that way at the end of the year. And I kept being frustrated because I was like, I can't find it in the numbers. Like, I kept digging through the numbers and being like, God, I just cannot find it. I guess they are better than last year.
I think they were, though, Matt, until Murray's last injury, because they came out, what was it, 13-3 or 13-1 or something like that out the All-Star break, and they were playing phenomenally, and they were getting big wins. Boston, like, there were big wins in there, and at that moment I thought they were that, but Murray gets injured. He misses 9 games, 10 games, something down the stretch. It's a lot, and at that point you're kind of thought, I don't know.
Yeah, so I talked about this on mine. I really do think that run after the All-Star break was actually the worst thing for him, because I think that they ran themselves. They were trying to sharpen up, and then it became about keeping the winning streak going. And I think that they burned a little bit of the Jets. I'm not saying that that's like definitively, like, if they had taken it easier and lost more games, they would have had enough to get past the Wolves. Like, I'm not necessarily saying that. This is all like very ephemeral stuff to kind of figure out. I don't think even the training staff has like numbers on this stuff. I do think from the conditioning standpoint, though, Chris Paul went vegan in his 30s, but Chris Paul also started getting like hardcore, crazy, serious about his body after his meniscus surgery and when he was like 28. The guards that have maintained have been guys that have been like, no, like, if I'm going to play at the top level, I have to be like, I just simply, if I want to maximize my earnings, right? And this is where it diverts from, I want to win championships, into the cold hard reality of the NBA, which is like, if you want great contracts into your mid to late 30s, you have to really just be like, I do have to obsess over my diet. I do have to obsess over
but
my
Matt,
training.
That was on the table for Jamal this year.
I know.
Make an All-Star game and you make $80 million more. Like,
I know.
There's not going to be a bigger incentive than that in his career. It didn't seem to move him.
I know. Yeah. And then, look, I will say, I think that the late run impacted things, but my problem with this going into next year, the reason I'm worried is I'm just like, he's going to play in Canada. Like, he's going to play for Team Canada. Like, you have to have time in order to commit yourself to the body part of it. Like, you just have to have time, and he's not going to. And like, even the training staff, like his personal training staff is going to be like, no, man, you got to rest. Like, you just played not 82. He played a 60-game NBA season. You played until May, and then you're right back at it in late June for July in the Olympics. Like, you're just going to need to take some time off to rest. And then, okay, well, you take after July, August, you rest for a month, and guess what? You're back into training camp. This is why international basketball can really mess with this kind of stuff, because, like, I'm with you. I think that Jamal needs to hey, not like I do this stuff. I'm just saying, for a professional athlete, like, he's got to be obsessive. Like, he's got to be obsessive about his body and his conditioning, to the point of it being like, that's going to be the main focus for him at all times. Like, I asked Mike Conley after one of the Wolves wins in Denver, I asked him, I was like, what does it take at your age to do this? And he was like, it takes so much work around the clock. He's like, that's why guys retire. Because he's like, it's not the games, it's everything else. And like, Jamal's way away from that. But if he starts now, then he can be like much better. He can be even better in his prime, and that carry forward. But I'm with you that I think that's like the biggest thing. What are some other key areas of internal improvement, do you think?
So, I mean, the big question is KCP. If you lose KCP, all of this gets thrown off. Like it's such a huge swing. If you have KCP, the internal development, look, Christian Brown went from a 35.5% three-point shooter to 38.5%. He took lower volume. I think he needs to probably up the volume of his three-point shots in his minutes to become more reliable. But that's a big area of internal improvement that I think can happen. Again, I don't even know if he needs to up the percentage, but he does need to up the volume. He took about 60% more. I think it was 164 threes this year. You probably need to get that up to like almost a double number, which means being more comfortable taking it while sustaining that 38.5%. But to me, that's not out of the question to think of. Christian Brown is a really good defender. I think he's already a capable defender for the level that Denver is going to need him. Even as a starter, in my opinion, defensively, he's capable of it. but offensively, he has to become a significantly more reliable three-point shooter. So that's one area of internal development that I actually think is possible this offseason. Not a lot to happen, but is possible.
Yeah, I think so. So much of me with Christian, I think, is I'm going to be like a skeptic until he turns the corner, and then I'll be like, oh, he did the thing. Like that's just like I'm kind of accepting.
But what is the corner for him?
For me, it's less about the individual stuff because everyone kind of points to like, well, he hit these shots after All-Star, and I'm like, yeah, okay. And then it's like, well, look at his impact. Okay, yeah. I just don't see a complete fluid offensive player that understands how to like. He doesn't seem to me like he's a guy that you can kick out to, and he can do multiple things with the ball because so many of his drives feel so out of control to me. Like, and some of that's just like the speed of the game, right? And him understanding that. But that's where I struggle, Adam, is like, how does he become a well-rounded enough offensive player? It's not the individual skills. For me, it's more about the complete package offensively. And I am just a little bit like, I don't know if he gets there. I just don't know.
Yeah, like is more or less than Nickeil Alexander-Walker.
Right. That's honestly a really good comp.
I mean, that's the guy that just beat him. And it's like, hey, that's also a compromised guy. It's Derek Jones Jr. or any of these guys. This is why one of my frustrations is we're looking at this as, oh, he has to be so much this or so much of that on offense. When I honestly think a part of it is Minnesota, those guys take the shots when they're open. Dallas, those guys take tons of shots. Bad shooters take tons of shots in Dallas's offense because that's the process. The process is when the ball gets to you, your job is to fire that thing up. And I just think Denver's going to have to get there because I think Christian Braun is a defensive player. Look, he was the best option on Anthony Edwards by a mile in that series.
A mile. Yep.
And I just think that it's like, okay, that's a tough cover. He did a phenomenal job. There is utility for him as a defensive player, like high utility. But offensively right now, even though KCP was such a low volume scorer this year, he still had the ability, the threat to do more. But I do think it's interesting that KCP doesn't do more in this offense. And maybe that's even an area where it's like, yeah, but you could probably allow for a little bit more freedom there. It's counterintuitive because it's not as efficient as the bread and butter, but sometimes you need to have that to open up the bread and butter. And I think that's part of Denver's problem as well. When the Murray-Jokic two-man game faltered, in large part because I thought Jamal Murray didn't have it, there wasn't a lot for Denver to fall back on to break that open.
We can go a little bit further in the segment. So Peyton Watson, for me, is like the big one that I see Peyton's ceiling. This is why I think I'm really baffled by this season, just because I never really saw Peyton fall off. He was just like, he was having a great season. And then the All-Star break happened. And then we never heard from him again. And I was like, what happened to Peyton Watson? Now, the Wolf series, like, I understand why Peyton didn't play in that series because I think for the coaching staff, right or wrong, it was a binary decision between him and Justin, and I think the gamble paid off. You could probably have played Justin and him together, but I think like the gamble ultimately paid off in terms of that specific sequence. But for me, like I look at Peyton and he did show me a lot of on-ball stuff. He did show me a lot of creation. Like his assists, his playmaking was better than I thought it might ever be. Like he's way far ahead of where I thought he would be at this point in his career. And the sudden and very strange lack of confidence, like removal of him, I thought was a little bit confusing because I do think if you're talking about a bench guy that can be on all levels, like a 3-level scorer, I think Peyton Watson projects it like that a lot more than Christian Braun does. I think Christian's a much more likely replacement starting 2 because of the defensive stuff. But I do think as good as Peyton is at blocking shots, but I like Peyton's upside a lot more. And I do think that if he takes another step forward this summer, that could be something that could really boost the Nuggets ahead next season.
Yeah, he's the one to me that I wish there would have been a little bit more development this year from him because now he's the one that to me that is such an X factor. He has an enormous upside as a player. I still love him as a player, but I think that we are about 20% behind schedule of what I was hoping to accomplish with him this year, including those playoff minutes. And, Justin Holiday had a very good games 1 and 2. Denver lost those games, but he was very good and made his shots in them. He was 0 for. He did not score, and he missed all of his shots in the final 3 games. So I think there was something of a utility drop-off to what he was providing the team that expired at a certain point, and then there's nowhere to go. That being said, I don't know if that means Peyton Watson would have made those same shots. I mean, he hadn't really proved to do that throughout the course of the year. I do think he's obviously a significantly better defender. But he's the one to me that if you told me he makes the improvements that gets him up to where I believe he can be next year, Denver's in a great spot. If you told me he doesn't really make those improvements or, he's never earns the trust of that, which is, I think, part of the equation here. If he never earns the trust, and they give him that, you have to suffer through some of those minutes throughout the regular season. If you don't get to that spot, I think he's going to be more or less what he was this year. And that's the part to me that is so scary about the Nuggets is they need Peyton Watson to be a top 6, top 7 player for them next year who they trust in every game, full stop. And he has a role that in this lineup, you're this role, in this lineup, you're this role, and this is how you score, and this is how you pass, this is how you defend. They need to get to that point next year in order to be that. And that's the one that I'm like 50-50.
Yeah, I agree. It's probably 50-50. On the other side, we'll talk a little bit more about internal improvement. Where could the Nuggets not get better? Let's ask that question on the other side here on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us, making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us. Third segment with Adam Mares. All right. What's your biggest concern in terms of I don't think that they can get better internally here?
Easy. Ball handling. Mm-hmm. And I love Jalen Pickett. I think he should have played this year. I think that it would be great if you had an 800-minute sample size so you knew what he was. I feel like you have zero idea what he was. I think he played some 20 minutes with a starter and the rest of his minutes this year without one. It would be nice to be able to see what he is, but unfortunately you don't. One thing I'll tell you that I don't think he is quick. Like when you talk about the release valve and what Bruce provided, scrambled defense, he attacks and breaks that down. I don't think that's what Jalen Pickett is. In fact, I don't think he's a heavy starter stagger player. I think he's more of a buy minutes in the regular season type of player, which is very valuable. But so I say that to say you're not running back and winning a championship with Reggie Jackson in that role. They don't have anybody on the roster that plays that role. And to me, they have so many holes to fill when you talk about depth, especially if you lose a KCP. That how do you find a guy that's capable of doing the Bruce type ball handling, attacking scramble defense, getting into the paint, just collapsing the defense? Where do you find that guy given the amount that they're able to spend? That's the one part that I look at and I go, that's tough.
I mean, look, I have pretty strong feelings on how the season played out in terms of who played and who didn't. But like I tried over and over again to reassert this point. Like they can get there. Like if Jalen has like an incredible summer league.
That's not his skill set, though. It's less because I have a lot of faith in Jalen, but that's not his skill set. He's a backup point guard. Like I think he's a guy that cannot turn the ball over and generate good looks for people. But I don't think he's a guy that you're going to say, take KCP out and put him in alongside Jamal because we need somebody to break down the defense when they trap Jamal. Like that's not his game.
Yeah. That's
Bruce's game, though. Bruce is quick, right? He catches that and he's going going downhill right at you.
And maybe that's going to have to be like one of the identities that they seek in the draft if they add somebody. I do like I'll say this: Reggie defender number 1, but like I don't see any reason for him to be on the team next year because if he can't be that guy, nope. Like,
but even Michael Malone understood that, which is what's so frustrating. He didn't play him a lot in the playoffs, so why did you play him 82 games?
Yeah,
like you were playing him 82 games because you felt you needed to buy minutes. But if you just need to buy minutes, then why not trust somebody that that allows you the flexibility of knowing that?
I'll say this over and over. They tried to have their cake and eat it too. They tried to be like, we're going to develop the young guys by playing them some, and we're going to try and win games by not playing the bench big minutes. And like, that's where they lost is like, you have to choose a path. It's either going to be 4 seed and you develop a more well-rounded roster, or it's going to have to be like you gun it and then you hope to God you have enough left at the end.
I think you get top seeds in the NBA by having overwhelming talent and overwhelming athleticism. And Denver doesn't have overwhelming athleticism.
I agree.
And I think that's one of the reasons that they're always going to have a hard time getting to 60 wins, for example, or I should say a lot of 3-point shooting. Like, and that's another one where Denver's not the Rockets where they shoot a ton of threes.
Right.
So they're always going to have to like grind teams out. And that's a formula for wearing yourself down. But I do think that there's also, this is my big point though, Matt, and it's less about playing the young guys, trusting the young guys, this or that. I think that Denver and Michael Malone is going to have to go away from his hockey rotation lineups for development reasons more than anything else. It probably costs you a little bit. It makes the season frustrating. And there'll be moments where you kind of look and go, man, is this the right path? But I just think Denver has to do it because there's no way to develop guys into Denver system without playing them next to Nikola Jokic.
Okay, so that's like an interesting question here because if we look at the whole, this is why the Wolves series I think is frustrating. If we look at the whole season, the problem was not the Jokic minutes, the problem was the non-Jokic minutes, right? Like they still continue to struggle in those minutes. In the playoffs, the problem was that they did not have other options to play next to Jokic in order to be able to get through because they were losing the starter minutes. And so like this creates a little bit of, I think of a paradox for the Nuggets in that, okay, if you play the bench guys more with Jokic, not we say starters, and it's Jokic.
It's Jokic, but it's also multiple starters. Like no other team plays as much one starter lineup, even if it was Jokic. So you
and so I agree with you. I think on the latter point of I think it would be better to be able to find lineups where it's like no, it's MPJ and Jamal, and then two of the bench guys, and then a variance factor, a vet or whoever. Because then your non-Jokic minutes are stronger. They have more continuity and chemistry with Jamal and MPJ versus like, I worry if you're like staggering these guys into the Jokic minutes. Like Christian played a lot with Jokic. It felt like this year. The numbers don't say that, but like, that's what I thought of a lot was like Christian playing at least second half of the year of Christian playing. Then that's in the late first quarter, late third quarter minutes when they started to stagger in. I don't know. Like, if you play with Jokic, if you play more with Jokic, you're not equipped for the non-Jokic minutes. And if you never play with Jokic, you're not equipped for the Jokic minutes. The style differential is so wide. I honestly wonder if maybe like that's the key here is like, you got to get like the second unit has got to look something like the first unit.
Well,
like it's got to look something like that.
I mean, you're going to have a hard time doing that when Jokic not on the floor, but you just said, give Murray and Porter to the bench. We've actually seen that. It doesn't work. To me, I would rather Jokic play extended minutes with the other guys. And that's namely Christian, Julian, and next year Peyton. And the reason is, and here's one other reason. One of the adjustments you can make, you have Aaron Gordon in that spot. He's a true power forward, and he's great at it. That's your sledgehammer. But you need to have something else in the tank for matchups to be able to break it. And to me, P-Watt is a different version of Aaron Gordon, or at least that's how he needs to develop into. Great defensively, offensively a little limited, but he creates frustrating matchups for you on that end of the floor. So to me, playing Peyton next to Jokic as a 4-5 combo, or even if you just say Michael Porter's out there and he's the 4, but Peyton's the 3, playing him alongside as the non-shooting forward next to Jokic, to me, has a lot of utility. And that's just something that they should have developed all year because it's a look you're going to need in the postseason. You need to know how to win with that lineup so you can punish teams when they try to go to their lineups to counteract an Aaron Gordon or what have you.
So are you almost to the point of thinking that like, and the 3 versus 4 doesn't really matter here? Like,
it's two forwards. You need that one needs to shoot, one doesn't.
It's like a philosophical differential, but I am kind of curious though, if you think that the late first, late second minutes, like halfway first, half second, or half third, back half of the first and third quarters is what I'm trying to say. Should that be like Yoke and 3 or 4 bench guys in order to be like, you should just basically be like, and then you could essentially play Jamal, Gordon, if KCP returns, MPJ, the 4 starters with like a random big in the second minute lineups.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, again, the stagger, I would never try to do this 1-4. I would always try to have 2 or 3 starters on the court. And for me, Jokic is the guy who most is able of playing with just one other starter. Give him one other guy, and now you can play those other guys around it. And by the way, this has less to do with regular season. Like, okay, now you're going to survive these minutes. Because to be honest with you, unless Jamal returns to form, his peak form, I'm not sure he can carry a lineup that has just 2 starters or 3 starters in it. I still am not convinced that he'll do that. But the question is more, can you develop an identity and lineups that you're going to need to win with in the playoffs? That's what you do. In the playoffs, you don't go to 4 bench players and 1 starter. You go to configurations of it. So why not get to that throughout the regular season? And part of that is because that starting lineup is so good that you feel like we're going to sledgehammer through people on this. The problem is, and also we want to have continuity. We want to have like familiarity. The starting lineup has so many reps together. They have more reps than most teams that are together for 5 years, let alone for two. So to me, I go, that lineup is not losing chemistry. It's good, but you do need to develop identity of these other lineups. Why not play Michael Porter at 4? What does Denver look like when they play with a stretchier lineup that's lesser on defense, at least in the front court? You don't really know because they never developed that identity throughout the course of the season.
The other thing I'll say here before we kind of wrap up is internal improvement. This is going to be, I think, more of an external conversation. But I do think the big thing is like they need redundancy. Like they need redundancy in terms of, if we talked about with Jamal, like having Bruce Brown, how that would have helped. if Gordon's not available, P-Watt needs to be able to play more like Gordon. He's got to add size and strength in order to play more like Gordon.
That was the idea, by the way, early in the year. We were talking about P-Watt learning the dunker and this or that, but there just weren't. You go to the numbers, there weren't that many minutes of it.
Yeah, I will say, like, a lot of this is like, what's the heaviest lineup with Jokic without Murray? And it's Reggie. Like, Reggie not only played every game and filled in for all of the Jamal being out games, but they ran a ton in the late first quarter, late third quarter of Jokic with Reggie with the other three starters. And I don't know what that accomplishes.
Yeah. By the way, Rob Sheldon is saying P-Watt is not a 4. Please stop trying to make him one. I'm not. The truth is, in staggered lineups, oftentimes there is no 4. You're right that he's not guarding typical 4s. Julius Randle down there. That does take away his advantage. The point is, teams will go to lineups where Pajemski is their 4. It's like where they're playing stretched out 4-out basketball, and now you're playing a 1, a 2, 2 3s, and a 5. And those lineups is where he would play. But you're right. You don't want him down on the block. You don't want him losing that advantage. It's staggered lineups, and it's situational, which often is something that's important in the playoffs.
Tommy, who's often in here, says, how do you guys feel about Murray getting a max deal? We'll talk about that later in the summer here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. My thanks to Adam Mares, dealing with some difficult circumstances and joining us on the show today. Appreciate him being with us for World's Finest. Swipe with you tomorrow. We'll be back for World's Finest maybe later in the week. I'll do a show, Swipe and Gripe, with Swipe on Friday. I wasn't able to get to it on Friday, but we'll definitely do that later in the week. Thanks for joining us. Make sure to hit the like button on YouTube. Make sure to give us the 5-star reviews if you're listening to this on podcasts. Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy your Memorial Day. We'll see you guys again next time on Locked On Nuggets.